name is Craig Matson, and I think I've been in liberal arts conversation since I was a kid. I think that's just been very much a part of my formation. One of the things I've always loved about it is what it does to time. When you have a conversation in the liberal arts, you're talking about the deep past. You're trying to inhabit the strangeness of the present, and you're also keening towards the future. And I think today we're sort of enacting that here. We have the past, the present, and the future in so many ways. So that gives this conversation a particular richness, and I'm really excited to jump into it. We hope to have some time at the end this afternoon for some questions from you. So as things percolate, jot a note to yourself, either mentally or actually on a piece of paper, and we'll try to make room for that sort of query near the end of our conversation here. So let's talk with you folks, and a very open-ended question for you. Give the people present here a sense of how you came to Calvin, and then what you did sort of on the far side of Calvin, if there is a far side for you, Philip. So yes, maybe Jenny, you could start and let us know how you found your way here, and then what you find yourself doing beyond.
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Hi. I am very honored to be here, especially next to Yaw, who has an incredible resume. I hope in 14 years that will be my resume as well. So it's a big honor. Hello, I'm Jenny Haan. I came to Calvin all the way from Washington. I did grow up in Washington State, as my bio mentioned. It's kind of a classic engineering story, I feel like Professor Wonder said, I studied engineering. My father was an engineer in aerospace, and so I was very interested in aerospace engineering. But at the time, Calvin did not have an aerospace engineering degree, which I just realized we do now, which is very exciting. But that was not an opportunity for me. And so I was interested in doing engineering. I also grew up in the Christian faith and wanted to find a Christian university that had an accredited engineering program. And so did a lot of research. I had a friend whose parents came to Calvin, actually, that I grew up with, and her dad did engineering. So she was like, have you ever heard of Calvin? And I was like, no, I have not. And I'm very close. I have 3 older sisters, and 2 of my sisters went to school in Michigan, not here, but up the road in Wyoming, Michigan. And so I wanted to be close to them. And so I found myself here at Calvin, one of the only universities that accepted me. So that's a big win. But it, I think, speaks a lot to the liberal arts. We'll get there. So during my time here, again, like my bio said, I discovered a very deep passion for sustainability. Professor Haan specifically, I think there's a question on professors that really impacted you. And Professor Haan was a big impact on my experience, and his passion for sustainability really bled into me. And I had the privilege and opportunity to go on a couple interim trips during my time here, one to Ethiopia with Professor Wonder, where I got to see firsthand how climate change was impacting communities that really are doing nothing to contribute to climate change. And that was really disheartening for me and really eye-opening for me growing up in America, where we're a big part of how the climate is changing. And so that trip kind of opened my eyes. Came back here, then the upper level classes with Professor Haan, where he often would bring up a chart on sustainability, and some of them were fun, some of them weren't. Interesting Chart Mondays. I don't know if you still do that. I know he's here. Yes, he does. Great. Those actually really stuck with me. They were very impactful. And so I just kept asking questions. I was very curious and wanted to know more. And then the sustainability designation, I think I was the inaugural class that had the sustainability designation. And so I got the opportunity to dive deeper and discovered my passion, and ended up, how I got to where I am now was kind of an odd way, which I guess is kind of normal. I actually wanted to do the Peace Corps following my time at Calvin, and I applied and got accepted. But I also needed to have a backup option in case I didn't get accepted. And so I had just thrown my application at a sustainable engineering firm in Seattle, because that's where I grew up, not really knowing anything about what they did. But then when I got the Peace Corps acceptance, I kind of had like a big moment of crisis of like, do I actually want to go abroad, or do I want to build some tools in my own toolbox? Because I don't know what I would be offering abroad if I don't have any sort of work behind me and experience and expertise. And that's not to say you shouldn't do that, but that just was my journey. And so I decided to take the job in Seattle that was a sustainable engineering job. And I'm sorry, this is such a long answer, but eventually that job was in the building industry. So that's how I ended up where I am now. The job was focused on very high performance building design. So many people have heard of LEED, which is, it's good, but it's like kind of the baseline for high performance building design. This company did like living buildings. And so they're buildings that produce more energy than they consume. They're really highly efficient. And so I really dipped my toes in there on systems design and engineering design, mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems, and did consulting for a while, and then wanted to kind of go on the inside, sell my soul to corporate America, sometimes what people say, or what I say. So I found this job at Starbucks because I wanted to do the work internally at a company that had a really large footprint, and maybe the work wasn't really being done yet. And so Starbucks had a position open that was right up my alley and was to decarbonize, which if you don't know what that means, just means basically reduce the carbon that a building emits. And that's through a lot of, well, I'm sure we'll get there eventually. I don't need to go into the weeds, but it's a really interesting process. And that's what my work had been up to the point of getting to Starbucks a few years ago. And so now that's where I am today, leading the program that I lead.
Sure, it's going to be a tough act to follow. So my name is Yaw. I'm from Ghana, so I'm one. Hopefully there are a few African students in the audience. I know Calvin has. Oh yes, yes. Calvin always has. As far back as at least I've been affiliated with Calvin, has always had a rich heritage of international students and many of whom from Africa, participating in Rangila and all of that. So. I've heard about Calvin through my parents. They were great friends with the former provost, Joel Carpenter. I think Dale Kuiper who was head director of admissions when I was in high school. So this was in the 90s. So I'm aging myself. But that he came to my high school and told us about Calvin in Ghana. And yeah, I was fortunate to be admitted and privileged enough to come here in 2000. I joined the biology department. I was always interested in biology as a high school student, and so it seemed like a natural fit to do biology as a major. And many faculty, some of whom are in this room, really poured into me. One of the key faculty I can remember was David DeHere of beloved memory, who identified me as a freshman and invited me to do research with him in the summer, which I guess was not all that common. Typically, it was upperclassmen or at least sophomores, but he was biology 141 first semester. So the very first semester in Calvin, and he was my lab prof, and he identified me as somebody he wanted to work with. So together with him and Joy Bonema, I got my first start in immunology, which turned out to be what I still do. So I got my first exposure to immunology here at Calvin, and in the class that actually I had the pleasure of sitting in with Professor Shen yesterday, Bio 333. And so that was my first exposure to immunology. I fell in love with it. And so when I went off to Northwestern, I did immunology. And that's where I got my PhD in. My story is a little bit interesting in that after I finished my PhD, I actually came back to Calvin as faculty. So I've done Calvin both as a student and as faculty. And I taught in the biology department together with several colleagues who were my professors who became my colleagues, which was a really nice, sort of a nice circle. So I see Prof. Zalstra is here. I know Arlene is here, Dave. Yes, and I think this one, Amy's here now as well. Yeah, so my peeps are in the house. Anyway, so it was really great to come back, and actually really poignantly, I took over Dave DeHere's class just as his health began to fail. So it was a literal passing of the torch from this young kid he identified, who was a 17-year-old scrawny kid who didn't know much of anything, but had an interest in biology, who he identified. I was able to come back several years later and actually teach a class that he was supposed to teach, but didn't have the strength to do so. So I thought that was I was really happy that I got back to Calvin in time for him to actually see the scientist I had grown into. So after 2 years at Calvin, my heart has always been for Africa. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm this really interesting biracial kid who thinks he's all black. And so I really love Africa. I grew up there, identify as Ghanaian, even though my mother is English. And lately I also, King Charles and all of that stuff. But, we can get into the identity if we want to later. So I'm very much a child of two worlds, but I identify first of all with Africa. And so I really was not satisfied with just staying in the US. I didn't want to be part of the brain drain. So after 2 years of teaching at Calvin, I thought I was ready to get back into research, but I didn't want to do research in the US. I wanted to do research in Africa. And so I got the opportunity to go to Kenya, to the Kenyan Medical Research Institute, which the particular center I went to is funded by the Wellcome Trust. If anyone is thinking of doing research on the continent, I can recommend it as one of the best places to do it. It's right on the beach. So literally you can leave the lab and go to the beach. My apartment overlooked the water. I mean, it couldn't have been better. And it was a really great place for me as a young African scientist to come back to Africa and begin to learn how to do research in Africa. Because doing research, life science research here is very different from doing life science research in Africa. And we'll talk about supply chain and those kinds of things. So after 2 years, I then moved to London, a little bit of a retrograde move at the time, I thought, because I was like, I'm in Africa, now I have to go to Europe. But, grant funding dictated that I had to move. But it turned out to be a really good experience. I went to the Francis Crick Institute, which is the largest medical research institute in the UK under a single roof. The director is a Nobel laureate. In fact, there are a number of Nobel laureates there. So it was a really high quality environment to really continue to grow. And actually, I should mention, I forgot one thing. Before I went to Northwestern, I worked at Van Andel for a year. So I've done a lot of things in Grand Rapids. Anyway, so after the Crick, or at the Crick, I began to think about my next step, and I knew I wanted to return back home to Ghana. And so I was looking for opportunities to return home, and had the opportunity to meet the director of WACBIP, the center that was mentioned in my bio. And so I relocated to Ghana in 2019. And at the time, I thought that was sort of almost the end of my journey, as in I was now home. I was going to be a professor in the university. And I began that journey. I had started supervising master's and PhD students, started a small group doing research in malaria, which is what I'd been doing in Kenya and in the UK. But within 6 months, I began to get really frustrated with the bureaucracy in the university. And, in fairness, all universities are quite bureaucratic. It's probably how they last 150 years. So, I think universities are designed to move relatively slowly because that's how you have checks and balances. But that can also be very frustrating when you're trying to do translational research and trying to adapt to a changing environment. So I began to feel I needed to do something a little bit more fast-paced. And that's what led me to found Yamachi, which is a now 5-year-old biotech company headquartered in Accra, where our main interest is genomic. Well, our main interest is life science biotech in Africa. Currently, we're interested very much in the African genome or genomics among African people and how that data can potentially transform medical research globally, but do so in a way that highlights the utility and the usefulness of the African continent and provides an avenue to hopefully give Africa a bigger voice in research and hopefully bigger voice generally economically around the world. So that's what we're doing now. There may be opportunities to talk a little bit more about Yamachi. I should plug, I'm giving a talk here tomorrow in the afternoon for the School of Health about Yamachi. So if you want to hear more about the science we do, please show up for that. I think it's at 2:30 or 2. Joke will be the one to give us the time. But that is how I'm here. I'm really excited to be back at Calvin. I've always held Calvin very close to my heart. And as I said, I can trace the trajectory of my career to this point has been influenced significantly by the people who mentored me here at Calvin, the friends I made, many of whom I'm still very much in touch with, some of whom are in the audience. And I look forward to how in the next 30, 40 years of my life, I can continue to be involved with Calvin in some way, helping to give back to an institution that has given me so much, and hopefully help broaden and ultimately the mission of Calvin, which is to transform the world, to be part of that mission. So very happy to be here, and thank you for the opportunity.
All right, so I will. My story is probably nowhere near as great as yours, so I'll try to go fairly quick here. So mine's almost the opposite, right? Because I'm not a Calvin alum, and I'm blessed to be here today, sitting next to some outstanding alumni. And I would say for me, I look back and picking up on something Yaw just said, I see God's providence throughout my career, and that providence is something that I get to live out every day. And when I'm working with students, and my background, David mentioned that I spent quite a few years at an agricultural OEM. So I spent most of my career in leadership, working for John Deere on like global projects around the world, and absolutely loved it. Phenomenal company. Oftentimes, a little bit due to my educational background, I was able to be one of the youngest people in the room when we were negotiating significant acquisitions, and had team members all over the world. But I was also spending half my life away from my family, and I have 3 little kids. Well, they're not little anymore, but I had 3 little kids at the time, and so ended up leaving John Deere. And now, as I get to teach, I've been teaching at Calvin for about 5 years, and now as I get to teach, I can look back and I can say confidently that God gave me some awesome opportunities, very similar to what you guys have had the opportunity to do, that I think is not unique amongst the faculty at Calvin. We all have those experiences, and we all get to bring them to bear to educate students, and that's so exciting. And for me, Calvin, I ended up starting at Calvin as an adjunct, teaching global supply chain for 3 hours on Thursday nights, which I'm sure is everyone's favorite class. But it was a great opportunity, and I found that I just loved developing students around that age, which was very similar to what I did when I was at Deere with my team, but obviously in a more intentionally academic context. And I found that I just loved that, and started here about 5 years ago, and started our operations and supply chain program in the School of Business, and it's been a ton of fun. And we were actually talking a little bit about that program earlier. So yeah, but I'll leave it there at this point, so that we can keep moving forward, keep the focus on the important people.
Thank you, Philip. And thank you two as well. I'm so grateful for the stories and the way that they give us a sense of just the layers in this room. Your reference to a late professor, your reference to your children who have grown up suddenly somehow, and both of your references to professors who've been important to you. The space feels thick and weighty with all the past and present here. But also your work is so future-oriented as well, trying to care for the lives that come here. So when I think about the layers of time, I often think about it intergenerationally. But let's just think about your individual lives for a moment. If you could go back to your undergraduate experience and maybe do a certain part of it again, like some sort of magical device that could like open up a little bit of room in your current schedule, what would you like another shot at?
Sure, I can go first. I feel like I'm gonna get an eye roll from the students in the room when I say this. But I think because at the time in college is such a like whirlwind of an experience, and you're kind of in survival mode a little bit, at least for engineering. You're just trying to like get through, pass your class, understand the material as best you can to pass the test. And so for me, this is a very like Calvin answer and lifelong learner answer, but I think I would love to go back and take some of the classes again, because I think at the time, and my professors can probably attest to this, I was not an A student. Like I was just trying to get through it and understand as best I could. Some of my friends are in the audience who really helped me get through it. I didn't know how to study, I guess. Like I didn't know how to actually absorb information and really take it in and understand what I was learning, because there's just so much coming at you. And it's kind of the beauty of a liberal arts education, and also maybe the thorn. There's just so much that you're doing. And I love learning. And now that I'm kind of out in the wild and have been doing it for a while and been in the industry for a while, I think I just would like to take some of the classes again to actually digest and like understand, like, because I think I have moments now out in the world where I'm like, oh, Professor Hume taught me this. I need to now remember like which class was that, go back, try to find the heat transfer equation, blah, 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 and like get there. But it would be nice. And I love learning and I love what I do so much that I want to understand what's behind it even more. And I know I can do that now, but I think we have such brilliant minds and brilliant professors and brilliant students that you're with during the time that you're all going through it together. And some people understand different parts. And I think that was just such a unique opportunity. And I would love to do that again and learn more.
Sure. I have two. One is something I'd like to go back and do again so I don't make the same mistake. So maybe I'll say that one first. It's really quite something a little bit silly, but with the hair, we were working on hyaluronic acid, and my first one of the most embarrassing moments, at least in my life at that point, was the day I accidentally squirted $500 worth of hyaluronic acid on the desk right in front of the hair because I was playing with the syringe. So there was a senior student, Kyle, who did the same thing, and it looked so cool because it's a bit like a jelly. So he was playing with it. So he put it down, and I did it, and it squirted out. And I wish I could go back and just not pick it up. I thought the hair would fire me that day, but he didn't. So that's one. The other is not really academic. I was an RA at Norcrest East. And I think that in my junior year, and the community we established with the other RAs in KE that year was really quite transformational for me. So I wouldn't mind going back to do that again. Just, we would meet on a very regular basis. We really got to know each other. It was more than just talking about our respective buildings and it was about getting to know one another, going on, retreats together, growing in our faith and sharing our journeys. And some people shared some really deep, very painful experiences that, shocked me at how open they were. And I felt we got really close in that year. So that is something I would certainly look to replicate.
Mm-hmm. Anything for you?
I'll put in a shameless plug for short-term off-campus programs. Those are, as a faculty member, so I take students to Mexico in January, and this year we're going to Brazil in May as part of our operations program. I co-teach that with Professor Haan from engineering. So it's kind of a hybrid class, and it's very similar to what you shared, Yaw, where it's the amount of spiritual development that you get to do above and beyond just what you learn when you're out in global communities every day is awesome, and something that I would encourage you students in here to definitely take advantage of.
Mm. So Wendell Berry compared people to slow-growing trees. I really like that metaphor because life seems to move so fast so much of the time that it's sort of a mindset pivot to think about ourselves as slow-growing trees. So I'd like to ask you folks to think a little bit about your development. And I'd like to ask you about how your conception of vocation has changed from when you were saplings to the stronger trees that you have become. How it doesn't hold still, right? Like you're changing, sometimes rapidly, sometimes really slowly, but you have a vantage point here. Take advantage of that vantage and let us know how it shifted for you. Your notion of vocation.
Yeah, I can go. I think I'd start this. I think for me, I kind of mentioned this when I started with the whole Peace Corps situation. I think when I was at Calvin, and I think, and again, the beauty of the liberal arts education, and also Calvin and Calvin's focus on vocation and agents of renewal, I think for me in the circle I was in, I really wanted to make an impact, and I still really do. I'm a very passionate person. When I get very passionate about something, I want to do it. And so I really wanted to make an impact, and I felt like my vocation was going out and making an impact. But the way I understood that at the time was like going to Gaza and making an impact, or like going somewhere far away and not understanding like my circle of influence well, or like my local, like kind of local versus global. And so I think over the years, as I've stayed more local, I made the intentional choice to be local and root myself and understand my impact where I am locally. I think I have come to learn like vocation does not have to be so far out. It can be where you are. And I think it can also be very far out. I think there are plenty of people who are called to go far and to make an impact far. But for me, I think, especially in the sustainability world, like a lot of the impact needs to be made here, in my opinion, around like what is going on and like climate change and the impact that we have, especially in America and our industry. And so, yeah, for me, I think my sense of vocation has shifted along with kind of like my career and my understanding of impact, and really staying locally and being influential where I am and not having to move far away for that.
I think for me, the image that comes to mind is a winding river or stream. And if I look at my own journey, it's been very windy. And I think what I've learned about vocation is to trust that we're not in control of our vocation. God has the plan, and it's God's plan. It's not your plan. You are, and He chooses when to reveal elements of the plan to you. So I always thought, I grew up the son of two professors. I always thought that my career would be entirely academic, that I was, my goal in life was to get my PhD before I turned 30 and become a tenured professor before I hit 40. Like that was, and we were going. And from high school through Calvin, PhD, I was on that trajectory. But somewhere along the way, now I sit here and I'm the CEO of a company, and I spend more time worrying about cap tables and revenue and stuff like, probably I was saying today, I should probably come and take a business class at the business school. Yes, I'm still very passionate about science, but now I am actually enabling science. So now I have people who are scientists doing what I used to do. I can't remember the last time I held a pipette, but I have teams of people doing really cutting edge science that I'm really excited about, that I still get to direct. But I'm worrying about the business side of what we do. And I think the lesson I've learned is God has the plan, and He knows what He shows us. And He chooses to sometimes blind us to some other aspects of the plan. So there are things that appear to be frustrating disappointments. But I look back, and every time there's been something that appeared to be a disappointment, it was actually a point of immense growth. So when I moved to Kenya, I thought I'm back in the continent. And everybody said I was brilliant and I would surely get this fellowship that I applied for. I didn't even get an interview. And I remember being at my brother's in Boston at the time. He was at Harvard. And I was so angry because everybody said my application was the best. Everybody except those actually reviewing the application. And I was so upset. I was like, how can they? And I looked at who else got, and I was like, I'm better. Like, how, I just couldn't fathom that I did not get an interview. Like it was, this is me. Like, come on. And so I went back, and the director of the program said, yeah, you can stay angry or you can move forward. And then a month later, an opportunity to move to London came up, and it was a fantastic offer. I was getting to do really cool work. Yes, it was outside of Africa. But 4 years later, I was such a stronger scientist than I would have been if I'd got that fellowship. I mean, I won even more competitive awards down the line. But if I'd won that fellowship then, I know that I wouldn't have grown as much because I'd had, a few £100,000 to do work, and I'd become a boss too quickly. But because I didn't get that, I went to the crick, and I was a postdoc. I worked under a senior scientist, and I grew in that environment. And so I wasn't ready. God knew I wasn't ready, even though I thought I was ready. But that then launched me into a new direction. And so there have been a few occasions in my life that I can look back, and the river has wound. And because I hit a block and then I went around it. And when I look back, it was that rock was exactly where it was supposed to be, because it stopped me from going down a path that I wasn't supposed to. So I think the point I'm trying to make is we need to learn patience and trust God, really trust Him with the process. and yield. We talk about Calvin, we talk about yielding our will to God, and that really is what vocation is. It's saying, you know what, I may have my ambitions, but I put them in God's hand, and I trust Him that He will place me where I need to go. And so I really feel that in my life. Right now, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Running Yamachi is the hardest thing I've ever done. I didn't have any gray hair 4 years ago. Every day I find more gray. And it is, in many ways, it is really challenging and really hard, and really dark sometimes. But I also would not substitute for anything else. It's also the most exciting thing I've ever done. And I'm getting opportunities I never would have imagined. So I think for me, vocation is really about trusting God with your life and doing His will, and accepting that He has a much longer view than you do, and trusting Him that you will be able to look back and say, oh, wow, that's a pretty cool path that God has led me on. And it's one I couldn't have done on my own.
How am I supposed to follow that? No, I could not possibly agree more. And Yaw and I are around like the same age, which is really interesting to hear him talk about this, because my students would probably tell you that I say something very similar about my own career. It's like, hey, I thought I was going to do this. I thought I was going to go become a consultant and make boatloads of money. And, when I was the age of some of you, and that wasn't God's plan. And I think I would just encourage you to embrace that. But the only thing that I would add, and this is maybe a little bit more tactical, is one of the biggest things for me that I realized the first time I became a supervisor responsible for working with other people on their development and those sorts of things in the private side, is how incredibly important it is for you to live out your values as a Christian. Like, it was, I don't want to call it an epiphany because it's a little bit cliche, but the best management book ever was written a few thousand years ago. And when you understand that what that book says for how you treat people is really how you lead people well, I was in a large Fortune 100 company, and I never had anybody come at me for espousing and just saying that I was a Christian and that's how I treated people. And I just want you to be encouraged and emboldened, particularly for the young students, be emboldened to live out your faith and understand that, other people will treat you better and respond to your leadership in a much stronger way if you do live that out. So that's the only thing I would add.
That's wisdom. Thanks. That's good. As a great proponent of the liberal arts once said, Ferris Bueller, life moves pretty fast. So one of the corollaries of that is that mostly you miss what's happening. Mostly stuff is going by you, like cars passing you on the interstate. But an occasion like this gives us a chance to say, okay, what happened? And I'd like to ask you about a particular kind of thing that happened to you. Something that happened to you in especially your days at Calvin, that didn't feel like a big deal in the moment, but later you realized that had a significant impact on who I am.
Yeah, I think I have two answers. The first, I've talked briefly about it, but really hyping up Professor Haan right now. But the Interesting Chart Mondays, truly, it's like the repetition of it and the continual learning and curiosity at the time. Like, I just was really interested. It was interesting. So you labeled it right. But over time, I think it put a seed that grew into me of something that I really cared about. I think the other one that is maybe it's not a moment, but just a series of moments is really just like, honestly, the engineering experience and the college experience, but I can only speak to engineering. Especially, I think all 4 years, but the final 2 years in the engineering building when you probably live off campus or in KE and you have to travel a bit farther. So you're kind of like stuck to the engineering building. There's this bonding that happens, whether it's trauma bonding or just bonding over survival, that you don't really realize. But I have, again, friends in the audience today who were there with me in those moments. We were all there for each other. And midnight working on E's, suffering, trying to solve a problem or a project. But also through that building really special relationships. And I think that has been so impactful. Those relationships have lasted. I think Yaw also spoke to this. Like those relationships have been so important in my life and so impactful. And we really have gone through the highs and the lows together. And I think you don't really realize it because you're just, again, kind of going through the motions and the time. But you never really have that experience again of like being surrounded, doing the same thing in the same season of life, just all moving forward together. Or maybe you don't feel like you're moving forward, but you are, I promise. And yeah, I don't know. It was really special and impactful, I think. And I hope the students have moments where they can just like take it in a little bit and stop and be like, oh, I'm doing it. Like we're doing it and this is going to last. And I'm going to take something from this like forward with me.
Yeah, I don't think I have too much of that. I think I would agree. I mean, mine is sort of once again, the process, specifically at Calvin, the rigor. When I became faculty, I used to tell students, it's supposed to be hard. I want my classes to be hard. I want them to be enjoyable and fun, but I want them to also be hard because if it's not hard, then I'm not stretching you enough and you're not growing. And I think back to my own classes that I took. If it was too easy, you just moved through. You didn't really absorb much because you were just a passenger. But when you had to engage and actually wrestle with material, it actually stuck better. And I think it's also good training because life is hard. College is the last time that you can just kind of have someone plan out everything for you. You wake up, you go eat breakfast, you go to class, you go to lunch, you go to class, you go to Heckman, whatever. I mean, it's all laid out. Maybe you do laundry, maybe not. But once life, these days people say adulting is hard. Life is really challenging. There are things that blindside you. I mean, you can go through significant personal loss or disappointments, career changes. So grappling with challenges in this somewhat protected bubble is really good training. And so I encourage students to embrace the challenge. Like, go for that challenging class. Don't try to dodge it. Don't try to work the system and avoid that class that everybody says is hard. Take it on, and challenge yourself. So I think for me, the fact that Calvin is academically rigorous is one of the best things about Calvin and one of the things that prepared me really well for everything else. And it's something I've held on to. The pursuit of excellence is something that runs through my academic life and runs through my company. I tell, any employee who comes to Yamachi knows things as we're supposed to, we work hard and I don't mind, everybody makes mistakes, but the idea is to push ourselves. So if you feel you're not stretched enough, come and, ask your line manager to find ways to stretch you further because that's how you grow. So I think that is the Calvin way. Maybe it's the Calvinist way, right? Stuff is supposed to be hard. So maybe I'm completely Calvinized, but I really do think that is a real benefit and a real something to be proud of. And I think I'd encourage students to really embrace that easy is not always the best, and hard is not always bad. And so I think that is what we really need to, I really take from my experience. And yeah.
Anything you'd like to add?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, one thing that I think is really unique about their stories that I talk about in my classes is sanctification, or in the operations world, God's form of continuous improvement. But I think what's exciting for all of us is to hear their stories and hear how God continues to work and how impactful the Calvin education has been for them as they look back on it, hopefully fondly more than not, no matter how hard it was.
Okay, so I have a challenge for you too. And Philip, you can join in on this challenge too, as you can sort of pick it up. What I'd like to ask you is to think of a professor that you haven't mentioned yet, or a staff member who significantly contributed to your formation. So my challenge is you can't mention Professor Hune. Sorry. But yes, excavate a little bit in your memory.
Oh, I got you. Yeah, no, I think the beauty of Calvin is that there's every professor, well, maybe not every professor, but in my experience, many of the professors in the engineering department invest in you, like that. We have smaller class sizes. And again, professors can attest, I was in their offices because they opened their doors. They had office hours. It was smaller classes. You could spend that time. And so I have a whole list, don't worry. But there are a couple. So I mentioned the Ethiopia trip that I went on, and Professor Wonder and Professor Cheryl Verbrae. I don't know if she's still here. I think she is in the geology department. She actually was the one when I mentioned Peace Corps. She did Peace Corps, and through that Ethiopia trip, and Professor Bascom, I can't leave him out of that because he really led that trip. Wonder was just along for the ride. But that trip and those relationships that I built on that trip with those professors, I think solidified my idea of where I wanted to go. And then Professor Verbrae, I highly recommend geology because then I ended up, because I went on the Ethiopia interim with her, I ended up going to Montana on a geology trip with her. And I, again, did engineering. I did not do geology, but I formed this relationship with this professor who invested in me, even though she wasn't in our department or in my department. And through that continued to become more of a mentor and like a woman in STEM that could guide me and could help me with some tough questions that I was asking about my future and my vocation. So yeah, I think Professor Wonder too, but I think Professor Verbrae had a big impact, especially in my later Calvin years when I was trying to figure out next steps and what it means to be a woman in science fields. And yeah, also just learned so much. I think the liberal arts education is so beautiful. Learning so much about geology is not a class it's nothing I ever thought I would do, but it even more solidified the passion that I have for this planet and this earth and like what we know and what science teaches us about how we care for it. And so highly recommend kind of dipping your toes in other classes that you don't think you might want to take, but could be really impactful and interesting.
Yes, I already mentioned like the whole bio department, so I can't do that. But Laurie Keane was, sort of the glue that held the department together before I was there, when I was there, and afterwards. And Laurie gave me a job too. So I worked for Laurie prepping stuff for labs. So, as an international student, our job options are limited. We have to work on campus. So I think I've done nearly every job. Most memorably, I removed gum from underneath every desk in the library and filled a trash bag. So yes, one summer. So yes, I did that. I worked in No Crest, mopping the floors. I mopped this building. But no, Laurie gave me a slightly more scientific job where I would help prepare stuff for the next day's labs. So Laurie was fantastic. And then Linda Bosch. Linda Bosch was the international student advisor for many years and was really like a mother away from home for nearly all the international students, and really, sacrificed a lot personally in her time and just really was a huge advocate for international students. We all, I think international students at Calvin, we all come from different places and we have maybe slightly different experiences of Calvin, but having somebody like her who tried so hard to really understand where we came from and just try as hard as she could to make West Michigan slightly more like home, which is not always easy, especially in the winter. But no, so Laurie Keane and Linda Bosch were two staff members who I recall really stood out for me and made my experience of Calvin that much better.
Thank you. Anybody you'd like to name is like shaping you?
I mean, it doesn't stop when, like, for faculty members, I'd say, I don't think he's here, and that's a good thing because he'd be embarrassed. But Jason Stansbury is extremely impactful for me in terms of faith integration and faith formation. And so I don't think he's here, right, Jim? So I'm not embarrassing him. Okay, good deal.
Yes. All right, so let's think about the three phrases in Calvin's mission: thinking deeply, acting justly, and living wholeheartedly. The mission statement continues, but let's take those three phrases and ask where they've converged for you in your in your work, in your life, thinking deeply, acting justly, living wholeheartedly, where have they met for you in what you do and who you are?
Yeah, I think it's pretty easy for me because I think that is in everything that I do with the work, with sustainability, kind of being a steward or an earth keeper. I think for me, I'm passionate about it for the justice, kind of environmental justice centered focus. You have to think deeply about it. Like it's constantly evolving. More science is coming out. Like there's just so much to learn. And it's fascinating. I think sometimes it can feel very like overwhelming and detrimental, but it also is just really fascinating for me. And I love to think deeply. I love to learn more and get curious and understand like, okay, why is this happening? So we can understand like, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Where is the crux? Like, are we just band-aiding something, or is there something more we can do? And also like, there's so much interesting innovation that we can do around it, around sustainability. It doesn't all have to be framed through a negative perspective. It's all very fascinating. And I think, like I mentioned, I'm a very like wholehearted, I put everything into what I do. And so I think it all converges, like everything that I do around sustainability is to live wholeheartedly. I'm really putting myself into it and behind it. And am very passionate about, I think, just the justice-centered work of it.
Thank you.
I think similarly, I mean, obviously, I think it flows through everything I've tried to do up till now. But I think the best example right now is Yamachi. I mean, Yamachi is my, is sort of my manifestation of thinking deeply about something, fighting for justice, and then trying to live freely. It's extremely ambitious to try to start a biotech company on a continent that doesn't really have that many. We are doing genomics, which is very technically challenging, and doing it in our context makes it even more so. And we're trying to tackle what I view as a huge injustice, which is the lack of data representation of people of African descent in genomic databases. So it is an issue of justice. And I was sharing at lunch today that I've got to the point recently where we talk so much about lack of justice, but how much do we actually do to rectify it? So you can talk about it and name it, but you have to do the restorative work to repair the damage or to address the inequity. You cannot just keep saying this is not fair. You have to actually do something to make it fair. And in our case, what we're doing is to try to build a huge, a clinical genomic database that would begin to at least have better representation. So Yamachi really represents that mission. And, maybe before today, I haven't really thought about it quite like that. So thank you. Calvin keeps giving. But I think this, Yamachi is my mission. Now, in 5 years, I may come back and maybe I'm onto something else. Who knows? The river may wind again. But for now, I eat, dream, sleep, everything Yamachi. But I think if I interpret it in those 3 words, it reflects my attempt to identify an issue, wrestle with it really deeply, and then actually try to do something about it and live trusting God. So to me, when you say live freely, it's not like just do what you want, but is be free in the knowledge that God is in control. So sit back, let him take the wheel, and then just do what he's telling you to do. And so I think for me, that's very much Yamachi, because it's a significant leap of faith. Anyone who's tried to run a business knows this. And yet we're still on that journey, and I believe he will continue to provide. And so I think that for me would be those 3 words.
I'm going to answer this question slightly differently. So, in my case, our operations and supply chain program is about 3 years old, and it's growing very quickly. And I was mentioning to lunch to these two that it's a very unique program in a few ways. We're one of only a handful of Christian universities that has a program in that, and we're also kind of an outlier too, because most of those programs are at large technical institutions. So the fact that we're at a liberal arts school where our students get that liberal arts as well, was intentionally structured. But the other big part when we build a program here is to think about how we equip students to think deeply, to act justly, and to live wholeheartedly as Christ's agents of renewal. And that's intentional in everything that we do. And at least for me, if that was to start fading at Calvin, I wouldn't be as excited about teaching here. And I think a lot of our faculty are the same way. And that's I think that's part of the DNA, and I think it's borne out very well by both of my co-speakers here.
Yes. Wonderful. Okay, so let's ask another very Calvin question, and that is, I want to ask about how the Christian faith has shaped what you do. And I guess I'd like to invite you can pick up this question however you want, because that is a huge question. But if you're looking for a handle to pick it up, what kind of Christian practice has been really important for you?
Yeah. I don't know if I'll answer it quite the way you're asking, but I think for me, again, like I think I've said this multiple times now, like I discovered my passion and my love for this earth through my Christian faith. Like I think the idea of, I think there can be some controversy. I'll try not to like create tension here, but there's some controversy around like the idea of creator and science. And I think for me, the more I learn the science, the more miraculous and awe-inspiring a creator is. Like, it's just like, everything is just so incredible. Like this planet, I think I get so moved. And of course, being from Washington around the mountains, like it's just so moving to be in nature. And I don't think I've met anyone who's like, I hate nature. Some people hate hiking, and that's totally fine. But like people are like, oh yeah, I hate trees. Like it's just like, I think we have such a beautiful planet that we exist on, that was given to us allegedly by a creator, if that's what we believe. And why would we not take care of it? Like, why would we not do something? Like, if we're given a gift, are we just gonna like, oh yeah, like smash it, like run all over it? I don't know. For me, it's like, it informs how I do my work and why I do my work, because it's just so incredible and so beautiful, and it's in everything, I guess. And it's a little fluffy, I guess, but I'm not sure I totally answered the question, but I'll start there. Yeah, we'll probably say something way better.
No, just you gave me time to think. So, ladies first has its advantages sometimes. So I think for me, as you were talking, so thank you. I was thinking about creation, fall, redemption, which is the three things. Like I think it was it CPOL? I can't remember the name of the class. CPOL, right? Yeah, like, whew. I mean, we were indoctrinated. But anyway, creation, fall, the idea of the world was created perfect. With the fall, sin entered, and it was no longer as perfect. And then the idea of redemption, and what I got from that was, we believe Christ will come again and ultimately redeem us, but the process of redemption starts now. And I think that is what we are each called. We are called to be agents of renewal in that redemption, that he will finally complete when he returns. But in that, till he comes, we are those agents. And I think that is what we're all called to do. In my work, I think I feel myself called to call out injustice as I see it, and then try to do something about it. The current, the more you study about biology, the more you study about the human body, you get so amazed. And then you're also amazed at how unjust we can be to one another, and how even in the area of healthcare, there's so much disparity. In that, based on the color of your skin or your socioeconomic status or where you live on the globe, you may or may not live as long simply because of where you find yourself. A good example is children with leukemia. In this country, a child gets leukemia, over 90% of those children will live. In Ghana, it's 30%. It's not because leukemia is, there may be some differences, but it's largely because, children in Ghana are just not going to get the same access. That is not right. These are children, right? And working at Yamachi, we do have a program in pediatric cancer, and I have seen many children with cancer. I didn't even know it was a thing till I started Yamachi, and I realized 80% of pediatric cancer cases are in low and middle income countries. So that is not just, that is not right. And so for me, in my little corner, what I'm trying to do with Yamachi is to be part of that redemptive arc, that process of how can we gradually work to bring more parity and more equity in healthcare, in medical research, so that children in Ghana or in Nigeria or in Kenya maybe one day don't have to die because they got leukemia, and maybe they can have similar survival as children in Grand Rapids. So I think for me, I think about our faith and the key tenets, and revolving around those three ideals, or those three ideas of creation, fall, and redemption. I really think the redemption piece is almost like when we leave Calvin, we're going out to be part of that redemption, and everybody has to find their little piece of redemption to work on. And I think that is what I am trying to do. And obviously I am broken and fallen as well, so I need to be redeemed myself constantly to do that redemptive work. And I think we need to take time to allow ourselves to be renewed by the Holy Spirit as well. But I think that is what drives my mission. And by God's grace, I will continue to remember that, especially as life throws a lot of challenges at you. But I think that is what stands out to me about what I'm doing.
So I'm going to speak a little bit more about sort of how we try to build that into some of our classrooms. But for me, so I teach a couple of classes. I teach an intro class and then a couple of upper level classes. In my intro class, we really focus on what it means to be a Christian in terms of identity. And we think about some of the spiritual practices and disciplines that go around that. But then we talk about, well, how does that identity manifest itself? And really we come back to love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself, which I think, Yaw is so much better at this than we are. So sorry. But, he just gave a great story of what we want to build. And as we think more about the constructs and structures further on, we lean heavily into shalom, which would be almost a manifestation of that redemption piece of, from a reform perspective, we want peace with God, peace with self, peace with others, and peace with nature. And that's a nice squaring mechanism that we try to embody in our classes to just help students think through, what does it mean to live into these areas after you graduate?
Yeah. Last question from me. And that is, I kind of want to just ask how you're doing. One of my favorite questions is, what's been saving your life lately? Another way to pick that up might be, what's giving you hope? So that's a big "how are you doing" question. How are you doing the thing you're doing? What's keeping you going?
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of talking about this earlier during our lunch, but I think for me, innovation there's so much around climate conversations. There's so much heaviness, but there's also so much excitement that I feel, and so much hope, because I think there's just so much innovation coming and happening. And also I think we're talking about AI, so I'll bring it up because I'm not faculty, but it's like AI, there's a real carbon footprint associated with it. So it's like this real sustainability, struggle, but it also, I think, can help. I have so many thoughts around it, so I won't go deep into it, but I think even with AI, there's so much possibility that we're discovering. I think there's a flip side to it of the responsibility and discernment that we learn at Calvin, and learning how to use a tool responsibly and design it responsibly so it doesn't have the large impact that it has right now. But I think there's, with that, also kind of this flip side positivity side, where there's a lot of innovation. There's a lot of, I also work in the kind of the regulation realm of things, like building regulations, energy codes, emissions reduction codes, or like emissions standards. And that actually gives me a lot of hope. I know it's kind of tough. And if there's anyone here who works in the regulatory space, you might also be annoyed by me or excited with me. But I think we see regulations coming, and there are regulations locally that have a lot of promise for moving the needle towards where we need to go. And that really excites me. And I think they can be done well and right and in a way that doesn't harm communities or the economy. And so I think I can talk all day. So if anyone's interested in the innovations that excite me, I think there's a lot out there. And then also regulations, I think, across the globe around sustainability. Those all like kind of give me life and help me feel some hope. Even when like, I think it's like, there's such a tough political environment, like back and forth. Like it's always flipping back and forth, wherever you stand. It's just like, it is what it is. And so finding things like locally and grounding yourself and figuring out wherever you are, like how to continue doing the work, like that is what kind of moves me.
I think similarly, I guess I draw hope or inspiration from what is around me. In my case, I live on a continent that is, the average age is 19.3 years. So 50% of people in Africa are 19 and below. And actually, I checked today, 40% are 15 and below. So, that is both a challenge, but also a huge opportunity. I mean, that is the future of the world, right? I mean, it's the fastest sort of fertility rates and the fastest population growth is on the African continent. And it's such a young continent. I mean, I am old by African standards in some ways. And yet there's growing stability on the continent. There's growing empowerment of young people. Young people in Kenya are taking to the streets if necessary to protest injustice in their government. People are not afraid to rise up. And in some cases, it costs them their lives, but they do it anyway. And so the power of the younger generation, some of whom are currently Calvin students, I think is really exciting. What I do is, of course, very challenging and very hard. And there are moments when I obviously I'm discouraged and wonder if, we're going to make it, what's going to happen. But I recently was talking to my team, and what I said to them was, I'm driven for us. Obviously, my drive for success is not because I'm afraid of us failing, but instead because I know what our success will mean. And companies like mine are in a position to really change the narrative around Africa. And that is something that as a young student at Calvin, from then till now, has always been my desire, is that when people say Africa, the first thing that comes to your mind should not be HIV, should not be tuberculosis, should not be famine or children with flies on their face, but it should be maybe the world's biggest tech company, or maybe some new innovation, or maybe some great artist like Burna Boy, or somebody like that, which, I mean, he did make late night TV here in the US, so maybe that is happening gradually. But that, to me, is the challenge for every young African, is we want to create Wakanda, but not some comic book version. We are creating Wakanda now. And that is why we keep going. That it will be difficult. And hopefully I am Joshua and not Moses, because I don't want to just see the promised land. I want to enter it. But what keeps me going is that our success will inspire people coming after us to do even greater. And so that's why we cannot fail. We cannot fail because it will just reinforce the old narrative. But our success will unlock untold possibilities and really inspire a generation that will redefine what our continent looks like and how the rest of the world looks at our continent. Because right now, the rest of the world looks at our continent as a basket case of need. But we don't believe it is. So it's for us to redefine that and show the value that we can bring and get that respect, but not by asking for it, but by demonstrating what we can bring. And I think that, to me, is what keeps me going, that I hope that we are the beginning of that bubble. And I'm fully confident that in the next 2 decades, there will be this huge transformation that has already started and will really come to fruition. And I'm excited to be at least play a little bit of a part of that.
So as faculty at Calvin, I would say what gives me hope is, given the challenges that are existing in the world today, I can't think of a more important place to be. I mean, whether it's AI. I think it was New York Times this last weekend had something about people using AI and thinking they were talking to God. Like, I think we can all agree that that's not right. But Calvin has to have a voice in the big challenges, whether it's climate change or AI or remaking the perspective on Africa through growing awesome companies. And to me, what gives me hope is I look around and I see colleagues who are bought into the fact that we need to be equipping students to think justly, to think deeply, act justly, and live wholeheartedly as Christ's agents of renewal. And that to me is what gives me hope every day when I wake up is, hey, I get to come to work and I get to equip students to do that. That's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome when you get to do that. So with that, I'll throw it back to you.
Yes. Thanks for sharing what's animating you right now. That's really encouraging for the rest of us. Speaking of the rest of us, do we have about 10 minutes, Heidi? 17 minutes. About 17. Okay. The other thing I forgot to ask you about is how we're going to do the logistics of, is there that mic right there and there and Michael? Okay. So now we'd like to open it up for you all to address questions to the panelists.
Hi. Okay, so my question is, what is Peace Corps? You brought it up quite a few times, but I haven't heard of it, so I'm just curious.
Oh, you hadn't heard of Peace Corps? Oh, I mean, I assume it's still around. It's basically, for me, it was a 2-year assignment. And it's essentially, it's like a nonprofit. I'm not a Peace Corps. I don't know how to totally explain it, but it's like a nonprofit assignment where you kind of get put on contract for 2 years you kind of have a selection of countries that you can choose from. The location assignment that I got was teaching women and girls math in Ghana, I believe, which is like kind of applicable to what I was doing, but also like, I'm not from Ghana. I'm not like, I wasn't a math teacher. And so I think there's some really, there might be other people who have actually done Peace Corps. So I hope they can speak highly of it. I did not, obviously, so I don't have a strong experience of it, but it's essentially just like a nonprofit kind of assignment to go do hopefully good work across the globe. And there are a ton of countries a part of it, but that's where I got placed. And then I decided I needed to have an impact here because that's where I'm from. Good question. Sorry, I kept bringing that up.
Hello. I'm curious, all you guys have had a lot of different jobs, positions, and like opportunities. How have you kind of found your vocation, and how have you decided like if this is like my vocation or if I should change jobs or something like that?
I can try. I'm sure everybody can speak to this. I think, as I said, I followed a pretty standard path initially. So going to school, going to grad school, following that academic path. So in some ways, it was relatively straightforward to know where to go for the first few segments of my career. At the same time, though, I had to decide which places to go to. So I had options of different universities. For me, what I've always tried to do is do some research to understand what opportunities exist. Oftentimes, I find when I look, I actually find there's a lot more than I thought there was. My job in Kenya, I can give you one example. I really knew I wanted to move back to Africa. And whilst I was, I think, in my second year, so I was 4 years out of finishing my PhD, but I found out about this center in Kenya. And I sent a letter. I found the email of the director and I sent him a letter. I prepared my CV, obsessed about the letter because I figured I had one shot. And I just sent him a cold email just saying, this is who I am. I've heard about your institute. I'd love to work there one day. I'm still working on my PhD, but could I stay in touch?
And he responded, and we did Skype before Zoom. And 4 years later, he paid for me to fly to Kenya to interview for a job that I eventually won. And I think it was because I took that initiative. Like, he was impressed that all the way from Chicago, I had found out about their center, and I had actually reached out, even though I didn't know him and I had no one to introduce me to him. So, the direct approach works sometimes. Obviously, you want to be strategic about it. But I think for me, the key thing is, as you're navigating, don't be too impatient or it doesn't have to be perfect initially. You don't have to know everything. It's a journey, and you'll discover many things as you go. But talk to many people, whether it's faculty, other mentors. Identify a few people who have careers that look like what you think you might be interested in, and ask them how they got where they are. So learn their story. Doesn't mean you replicate it, but at least you build up your knowledge. But I think it's really about building up information, educate yourself, and then be willing to explore. And then the final thing is, don't be afraid to change course. Sometimes we get locked in and we think, I've invested so much in this path, I can't change. That's not true. If you get to a point and you really feel the pull somewhere else, that could be God's leading. So discern whether it is. But if necessary, make that switch. So I think it's about information gathering, talking to as many people as you can, being thoughtful about it, and then at some point having the courage to do what needs to be done, whether it's sending a cold email to somebody or making a switch if necessary.
Yeah, I'd maybe add just a couple things. That courage piece may sound hard, but I think it's important to remember that God's in control. And even if you're in a position that you're not crazy about right now, I guarantee you God's going to use it for something great. I've not had a single job in my entire life where I loved every second of what I did. So you're not going to love everything that you do. Every job has something mundane, at least until you get AI figured out for us. But every job has something that you don't like, but every job has stuff you can learn from that will make you stronger for whatever the next opportunity that God's going to call you to do is. And I think, like I said, Yaw and I are like the same age. And ironically, I was private sector and then flipped to academia the year that he was academia, flipped to private sector. So it's like an inversion here. But when I was your age, I would not have thought that I would be a faculty member. I was definitely going to stay in the private sector. And he would probably say the exact opposite based on how he's answered the question. So I would just encourage you to be flexible and have courage, because God's in control. That is not a justification to take stupid risk. So be careful with that. But understand that God's in control and be comfortable with that and enjoy the ride. I guess would be the other piece.
Can I also add one more thing really quick? I feel the need to speak to this because I personally am obviously very passionate about what I do, but I'm also married to a man who is not passionate about what he does. And I think that's okay. Like, I think we need to normalize that, sometimes your job does not have to be your vocation. You might find your vocation outside of the workplace. You might find that there's a volunteer opportunity or a hobby, whatever it is. It doesn't always have to be your job. I think your job is a means it could be to funding something else where you can have the opportunity to go somewhere else, or to invest in a hobby or invest in a nonprofit or whatever it is. So it's okay to find a job and you're like, man, this really is not it for me, but it feels like where I should be right now. And it's giving me the opportunity to then invest my time and energy also somewhere outside of it. So I think it's awesome finding something that you love to do and you get a paycheck for it, but it doesn't have to be that all the time.
Right over here.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I had the privilege of learning and saying when I first moved into my role here at Calvin a year and a half ago was that our world needs more Calvin alumni. And the stories, Jenny and Yaw, that each of you shared today just reinforce and demonstrate why I think that statement is so incredibly important and true today. So thank you on behalf of everyone for sharing your stories and reflecting on your time here at Calvin. You both have built teams, I would assume. You're hiring people. What advice do you have for our students when you're building a team, you're interviewing somebody? What are the things you're looking for in that interview process? And how can these students start to prepare themselves for that first step in building on their career?
Yeah, I think especially entry level, like when you're coming out or going to an internship or going to your first job out of Calvin, for me, when I'm looking at entry level positions, I'm looking for curiosity and work ethic. Like we can teach you anything, especially if you're again, engineering for me. If you're an engineering student and you get your engineering degree, you have proven that you can work hard. And so I can teach you anything at that point because you have proven that you can go through the curriculum, the rigor, and do the work and get the degree. And so from there, it's really how you show up. Are you curious? Are you interested? Are you invested? Do you want to learn? And yeah, just can you show that you are willing to, essentially? I guess that's a quick answer.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think when I'm interviewing young, entry level people, we've already screened you based on your CV. So at that point, we know you have the core competencies. You know how to do what we want you to do. The question is, how will you do it? What attitude would you bring? And I think the curiosity is something that, especially in my sort of work, is really important. I want people who are curious, who are going to ask questions, who are going to contribute even from an entry-level position. And I think you can, as somebody who's being interviewed, you can communicate that by how you prepare for the interview. Understand what the company or the business does. Read, look at their website. If they tell you who's going to interview you, read their profiles, go on their LinkedIn, find out who they are, what they've done. So show an interest in both the company and the person who is interviewing you. I think that communicates a maturity. It communicates a curiosity, and it communicates work ethic because it demonstrates that you didn't just show up and expect to just freestyle it, but you actually put some work into preparing for the interview, and it shows immediately. One of the first questions I ask is, why are you applying to work here? And if it's just, oh, you guys seem cool, that's negative points for me. But if you can communicate and articulate why you picked Yamachi, that shows you've gone and done some work to understand who we are. And that's the kind of people we want. So I think preparation is really important. Never underestimate the importance of preparation, whether it is an interview or a presentation. I still, I present all the time these days, but I still, take some time to prepare because you get a one shot to make an impression and you need to make a good one. So you have the tools, especially if you're a Calvin student, but you need to polish them before you go up to that interview. And so take the extra time to actually present yourself in the best possible way. And you will find it will pay off in many ways.
Hi. Do you sometimes feel like the issues in Africa are too great for our individual efforts, or like the issues with climate change are too great for like our individual attempts to correct? And if so, how do you remain hopeful that it will work out?
Yeah, from your accent, I can tell you're from Ghana, right? Yeah. So, well, I can try, and then maybe I'll give you a chance to think. You've been bailing me out the whole time, so let me. No, I think it is true. The problems we are all facing anywhere in the world actually are bigger than one person. But it also takes one person to start. And so I think the challenge is to not be paralyzed by the scale of the problem, but to instead be inspired to be part of the solution. So I don't expect to solve the big problems that I've identified, but I want to be part of that solution. So when I do that, I don't overwhelm myself with the scale. I know that I'm going to be a part of a solution, maybe not the full solution, but I may be the catalyst, or I may be the spark that gets it going. Because in truth, if we wait to get a critical mass before we try to solve a problem, we'll never solve anything. And if you look at history,
The greatest achievements of our species, of humanity, right, have been when individual people take a stand, sometimes against huge opposition, and sometimes it costs them their lives, but we remember them because they kickstarted. I mean, Jesus is the best example, right? So I think and I can speak to you as an African, sometimes when we look around us, if you're in Ghana or you're in Nigeria, you see some of the challenges we face and they are in your face. Not to say there aren't challenges in the US, but sometimes it's a little harder to see some of those challenges. In Ghana, you see it very, very clear. Poverty is very, very obvious to you and the scale of the challenges is really big. But it shouldn't disempower you. It should rather encourage you to be part of that solution, to identify what little piece you can do. And you'll be amazed at how God will multiply those efforts, right? So for me, that is, I reject the temptation, because I really think it's the devil's temptation to say, oh, this is so big, you can't do anything about it. That is the devil speaking. You can do something about it. You will not maybe do it on your own, but you step forward, you find 10 people just come behind you, right? And all of a sudden it's a movement. That's how we became independent, right? That's how so many things have been achieved on our continent and around the world. So that is really my response to that, is do not be paralyzed by the scale of the problem. Be energized to be part of that solution and then see what God does after that.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I think for me, I think that's in a big part why I'm at Starbucks. Like, I think when you think Starbucks, you hear sustainability in Starbucks and you're like, oh, like what? It's like coffee is agriculture, farmers, like there's kind of a big footprint there, but also that's why we're needed, whatever your version of Starbucks is or your version of Africa. Like I totally agree. Like the individual contribution can get really sticky really fast, and it kind of blurs the responsibility that we should hold kind of the systems to or like break down. But there's also still work that you can bring and do and have an impact, even where it might feel like it's kind of the antithesis to what you're trying to solve. That's actually maybe why you should be there and be doing the work. So who else is going to if you don't?
Really wonderful questions. Let's let the conversation continue after this time. Please feel free to come up and greet the panelists and interact with them and extend the conversation further. Really grateful to have spent this time with you this afternoon and wish you well.
I have a shameless plug that if I don't say Professor Washington will kill me. So there is an intensive course to Ghana. So those of you who are students, there's an intensive course to Ghana in January, and Yamachi is on the list. So if you want to come to Yamachi, sign up for the intensive to Ghana. Thank you.
Good.